Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I thought was so interesting, obviously, where we started off with Barry doing his best to track down Fuerza. And you could tell from immediately, just like the way he was looking at the video, and he's trying to make it seem like everything's okay, that obviously this episode deals a lot with fear on many different fronts. We got it with Cecile at the beginning. At first, I was wondering that was potentially connected to something else, like what she saw, the way it manifested itself, because it was like someone in a straitjacket talking to her. So I was wondering if maybe that has something to do with her past or something that we've never really gone over. But it was like, oh, but then like, right, her biggest fear most recently has been losing control of her powers. So, and then obviously for Barry, he doesn't let on, but he is scared of Fuerza because it's like, this is a thing that survived an antimatter bomb. Once again, this thing kills everything in the universe, and it couldn't stop this creature. So that's the thing of like, I think that right there in itself was kind of like the whole point to that. Like even in that moment, it couldn't, which that kind of ties into some stuff later on, but we'll get to that soon enough. So he's trying to do whatever he can to track that down. Obviously, we're dealing with the whole, Frost and Caitlin situation, them being separated, and Frost is kind of enjoying it because also it's like now she doesn't have to get stuck watching This Is Us, which I love. Cisco was like, we talked about this before, Frost. You don't disparage This Is Us. Those actors are too good for this world, or something like that. Essentially, like, we don't deserve them, or something like that. But it is. I did like that dynamic immediately of like Caitlin wanting them to fuse immediately, and I do like that they did bring into the whole like fusion matrix that obviously Robbie and Stein and eventually Jackson Stein used to fuse together to become Firestorm. It's like that was kind of their main plan. But Caitlin's all about it. Frost is reluctant just because for Frost it's like, I've been able to live like half of life because Caitlin lets me kind of live my life, kind of take the reins, kind of do my thing, kind of be my own person. But it's like now I am my literal own person. I want to just, kind of live it up. But for Caitlin, it's like she's so used to having Frost inside of her head. It's been like this for so long now that it's like it's too quiet now. So for her, it's a situation of them both kind of not wanting, it's like they don't ever want to lose touch because it's like, hey, we are sisters in a sense, So it's like, neither one wants to lose the other, because for Caitlin, it's like, because later on Frost's fear comes up about like, that I got arrested for my crimes and you turn on me. It's like, I would never turn on you. I've got your back, I would never do that. And she's like, yeah, I know. So, but it's just the thing of like, we can just, two snows are better than one. So it's like, we can, never lose touch, always be together, but without, fusing back together. Once again, I'm curious to see if there are going to be ramifications for that, like them being separated like that. Will it be a situation where it eventually like starts deteriorating them to a certain extent or not? Like so far it seems A-okay, it's all fine and dandy, awesome, but we'll see whether or not that continues to be the case going forward. I didn't talk about it, but Fuerza, I love that whole thing, and everyone's looking at Cisco, and he's like, Fuerza, it's Spanish for strength. He's like, come on, She-Hulk was already taken. I was like, but nevertheless. But it's not just Fuerza they have to worry about, because they have to worry about the new threat, who later gets named Psych, which is, I like the name just because it makes me think of the TV show Psych as well. But interesting enough, Psych, I'd assume it's him behind the mask too. He definitely did the voice for it, but I don't know if that was him just behind the mask because he never took the mask off. Was once again Enos Esmer. I'm probably like butchering his name, but it's so interesting because comic book wise he was comic book wise because he was in the TV show Dark Matter, which is a comic book. Isn't that's a what is that a Vertigo comic? Dark Matter. I don't remember if that is. I don't think it might be. I don't remember if that's a Vertigo comic or not. That might be. I know it's obviously a comic book, but I don't remember. Or is it Dark? No, I think it's Dark Horse. I think Dark Matter was a Dark Horse comic. I think so. I could be. I'm probably mistaken. Regardless, there's that. But also, most recently, he was in an episode of Winona Earp, also based on a comic book. So I thought that was interesting in that regard. He wasn't in this past week's episode, but the week before, episode 9, he was in it. So I was like, look at you, like doubling up. I like that. But this was an interesting villain that basically gets inside of your head and makes you see your greatest fear. Obviously, manifesting, like, obviously Cecile, like, he didn't target Cecile directly, but because her powers are amplifying, she's acting as like an antenna and she's picking up on it. Like, obviously we kind of slow pieced that together earlier in the episode when there's like a robbery and the guard was on duty, like, was slept through it, but it turns out like, oh, he was having a nightmare. Cecile picked up on it at the same time, so it's like, okay. And as I like the way Joe kind of puts it, it's like, oh, there's a Freddy Krueger meta out there, and it's like, yeah, kind of his deal. It's about scaring people, but obviously once he scares you enough, it tricks your brain into making you think, it's real. So he goes up against Thawne, he goes up against Savitar, and gets stabbed in the chest by Savitar's blade, and it manifests as a real life wound. Luckily, Barry can heal fast, so he was able to survive that, but yeah, you die in these hallucinations, you die in real life. Very, Freddy Krueger-like. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They tried to use the meta, those dampeners to block out his power, but it didn't work. And what I thought was so fascinating is, we got to see Barry's vision, we got to see Frost's vision. We never got to see Cisco's. He describes it later on that it was just about Camilla, like something happening to her. But I was like, I think it's so, I guess we're working around that, sure, so they wouldn't have to show you. But I just thought it was interesting that, I guess because Camilla's not in this episode, so it's like, well, that way you work around it by not showing the vision. But I thought that was just so interesting that, like, part of me was wondering, like, is there actually more to it that he just didn't talk about? Just like Barry didn't want to talk about his, because once again, you kind of talk about your fears. It, comes to, because it's interesting because immediately Cecile was kind of feeling like a whole bunch of fear. I guess at that point it was Psyche already using his powers, or by then maybe it was her kind of feeling a little bit of Barry's fear at the time. I don't know, but later on, like, it hits Barry even harder because he got double dosed, and it's like it has residual effects, so it kind of stacks. Like, after the first time, like, it goes away after a little bit, but like continuous like dosing back to back does have a lasting effect, and so the fear kind of takes over you. Whereas it manifested as the bad guys before, this time it manifested as everyone he cares about dead around him because of Fuerza, because she's a threat that he doesn't know how to beat. Because Thawne and Savitar, they might come after him. It's like, these are baddies I beat before, but it's like, this was on a different level because those are baddies he was able to stop. This is something he doesn't know if he can. And I actually really thought was pretty dope, him having the conversation with Cecile about the fact is that for him, like, the most recent, like, he's always felt threatened by foes before, but the last time he was this scared was Crisis, like, where he knew everything was wiped away. I mean, hell, he literally watched everything and he cares about get wiped away during Crisis. So, but thinking like, oh, Crisis is over and he averted it, he thought like he never had to worry about something that had to give. But now seeing Fuerza wiping out everyone he cares about, it's like that fear he had for Crisis kind of came back in a certain extent, because, now it's like, this is something he doesn't know if he, like, at least, there's just, like, in his mind, it's probably a thing of, at the very least, if I die during Crisis, I know I can stop it and I can save everyone I care about. But, like, this is something I don't even know where to begin about taking this thing on. So that's kind of the big snafu in that situation for him. Cecile has to remind him that he kind of runs through fear every day that he's doing his superhero thing. So all he needs to do, like, obviously he's able to give so much courage to other people, and it takes so much courage, because she's like, when I get like overwhelmed or scared, I think to myself, what would the Flash do? And she's like, no, seriously, I think that because you were so courageous, like, you push past fear, you run through fear, and you do what you do, and you give that courage to so many people. So it's like, just take some of that courage for yourself to face your fears. So obviously he gets drowned in that fear again, and obviously it gets pushed even further with everyone being like, you failed us, you let us die because you were too afraid to open your eyes. And in that moment, Barry, like, opens his eyes and pushes forward. Obviously, they put Cecile in DeVoe's chair, and she was like, what? Are you crazy, Barry? The last person that was in his chair, DeVoe, turned into a straight-up supervillain. It's like, but you've got this. And I even love, it's like, Caitlin being like, medically speaking, you'll be fine. It's going to work out. You're going to be okay. She's like, okay, probably. And she's looking like, I love her being so nervous. But she's able to kind of tap into everything, because now Psyche is basically spreading his nightmare influence all over the place, which I thought was so interesting because it was almost like through capturing people in their nightmares, he was talking about freedom and stuff like that, which is so interesting because it's kind of like, well, we got Black Mask in Gotham kind of saying a similar thing of kind of like going about things, kind of finding some form of justice / freedom in the way he goes about things in a psychotic way. So it's interesting the parallels that can kind of be drawn in that case. Also, another DC thing is like Pennyworth, because obviously Pennyworth, there's the Storm Cloud, which is kind of like either the precursor or like the potential eventual foundation for what Scarecrow's fear toxin is, because the Storm Cloud literally scares you to death. So obviously we know a big person in DC who loves to fear gas you up is, Scarecrow. So I'm assuming it's supposed to be the foundation of what he eventually uses for the core of his, if that's the direction they're going or not. But it's just interesting, like, two things related to fear, in these DC things. One being kind of connected to Scarecrow without being a Scarecrow, and another one being a completely different thing in the same universe, causing fear and nightmares on a different level, but still. I just thought that was interesting. Regardless, Cecile's fear of, losing control over her powers in this moment, with the chair's help, she amplifies her ability, takes Barry's courage, and she spreads it across the entire city, even spreading it to Psych, ended up destroying him. Now that was interesting because it's not like, you would have thought like the mask would have disappeared and we see the person behind it, like the mask would have gotten destroyed, but it's like he disappeared in his entirety. So you're like, now what's up with that? So I was like, that's fascinating. All of that disappeared. So we've got that going on. So luckily everything worked out, which is like, Cecile's so happy. She's like, I did it. And they're like, you did it. She's like, I did it. Oh man, I'm wiped out. I need an energy bar, so that's pretty dope. At the same time, there's another element to this story where Iris is kind of weary about that Kristen Kramer, who's there to kind of, be kind of the liaison to kind of check things out in Central City. And she's like, oh yeah, I just want to introduce myself first. But Iris is just kind of a little weary of her. It's like, yes, I'm not worried about being deceived like Ava deceived me. I'm more so like, as my, her reporter instincts of like, I gotta trust my gut on this. So I need to, I think there's something up with this lady, like so much of her files have been redacted, and Joe confronts her later on about it, and it turns out, for her, it's like, well, things have got to change in the city, and it's like, wait, you're here for the Flash? She's like, no, he's clean for now, which I was like, oh, that's interesting, and she's like, what I'm actually here for is Killer Frost, like something that, basically the governor wants me to arrest her because you guys are just apparently just letting her go on about, well, yeah, she's done some villainous stuff, maybe this might even tie into some of the, like, that, what that vision of hers was saying about how you, all the stuff that she's done, like, maybe it's even stuff that Team Flash and, maybe even Caitlin at the time might not have been aware of what she's done. Like maybe something on that front and that level. But I'm really curious to kind of see where things kind of go from there. But on that front, but like the fact is that I think she might be kind of want to kind of shake things up in Central City of like the menace that is metahumans have kind of run wild and rampant for too long. So that might be kind of what her job is. Like, yeah, the Flash is fine for now. I mean, I guess there's no like hate for Cisco because his powers are all like technology based now. So like maybe they're not counting him in the same vein. But the fact is she's like, this Flash is clear for now. So I think they're probably might do a more roundup of like metahumans, which is something I brought up recently about that being, in Argus's future. We got it, we ran into Argus, like, was it last episode? So part of me wonders, is there going to be any ties to that? Because Argus was like capturing and lining up metahumans. Granted, the future's changed and stuff like that, but once again, it's constantly in flux and can kind of change just, with the shifting and changing of the tides of everything. So I'm curious if this has anything to do with that, or is it just kind of a separate thing? I'm curious, is it just going to be like I'm coming after Killer Frost, but it's like they're going to have to keep Frost away? They made a point of that like an episode or two ago, like, yeah, you're still kind of wanted by people, so you can't just be out and about doing your thing. So we see that, which is such a shame because she, time and time again, has proven to be a hero. She's helped save the day. She's helped save Central City on multiple occasions, but that probably doesn't discount all the other terrible stuff she's done before. So it's gonna be interesting to see what those storylines end up turning into. Cause I thought it was interesting too. It's like the whole thing of like, once again, you made those references because it's like, oh, you were in Gotham. She's like, yeah, been there from time to time. It's like, I do love the Knights, and I'm like, nevertheless, I'm assuming specifically she was talking about like the football team, which I didn't know. Victor, like, until Justice League, I didn't bring this up during my discussion of the Zack Snyder's Justice League, but I didn't know he grew up in Gotham. Maybe that's just specific to that continuity. Because I'm like, well, because once again, it also depends on like how far are these cities apart from each other. Like, how far is National City from Metropolis? How far is all that from Gotham and Central City? Because that's kind of like, I would assume that's kind of implying that Star Labs is in Gotham. If he's playing for well, it could just be like he worked somewhere else and then he eventually moved to Star Labs, or maybe it's like a it's kind of a long transmute. I don't know. I don't know. I'm probably overthinking that too much. Or like, trying to break down the geography of the DC universe. I'm sure it exists somewhere of like a map of just like where everything's located. And I'm sure it exists somewhere and someone's got it mapped out potentially. Regardless, tangents and all that aside, it just got me thinking about that because I was like, right, I don't think that it ever come up before that he was. But I mean, it could just be like he moved there and grew up there. But maybe, like I said, it's beside the point. It just kind of made my brain kind of trail off at that moment. So it's going to be interesting to see where this whole Kramer situation goes with our hunting down Frost. Another thing we saw, I haven't even touched on yet, is the return of the Speed Force. Like all of a sudden, like the lightning and stuff came together, and she fell out of the air. And it's like, okay, what's up with this? The last time we saw her was when Barry kind of quote-unquote killed her. Granted, there was enough of, like, the Speed Force left for him and, like, Wally to have some of their powers. So she was still around on some level. But maybe she got restored the moment Barry created his artificial Speed Force. Like, maybe, like, they are still connected so that when he created his artificial Speed Force, there's been power flowing back into her subsequently since. Who knows, because she's in a coma most of the episode. But then at the very end, like, something starts hitting Barry and it's just becoming too much. And it's like, it's not psych, but it's something else. And so he ends up grabbing, like, the console and it starts short-circuiting. And I was like, part of me is like, is there, like, so much power fluctuating through him? Like, is he absorbing too much power and it's becoming too much? So he puts himself in cryo. But the moment he does that, the Speed Force wakes up, and for her, it's like, what happened to Barry? She's like, Barry, has kind of got attacked by, Psyche, because both Psyche and Fuerza both attacked her because she's not back at full strength. So I'm wondering, is that kind of implying, like, Barry got his speed back and he felt like, oh, I'm faster than before, but maybe even then, like, he's still only at a fraction of his true power, maybe, like, it's kind of what that, like, it still hasn't, like, fully kicked in or whatever. Because we see with her, like, her watches, because they put the monitor on her, they kept, like, her speed and energy, and it was red before, but then when she got up, it was yellowish, so... But what was really interesting is the line of, they attacked her. And obviously that was also the thing, too, because it's like, it's essentially a god in front of them. It's like this all-power, sentient being. It's like, so Fuerza and Psyche were able to do a number on her. But then, like, comes the thing of, like, well, what are they? And she's like, they're like me. And you're like, what does that mean? It's like, so that means they're like god-level beings too. They're sentient things as well. Like, I'm wondering, could this be like kind of like a literal manifestation of like different things? Like, how like the Speed Force is kind of like maybe this like literal it's a dimension. It's a being all in its own. That maybe, I mean, that's why I was thinking, like, that's interesting that Psyche disappeared, that Psyche doesn't have a physical form, because the Speed Force technically doesn't, but the Speed Force chooses to manifest in a physical form, but the Speed Force said, like, oh, she didn't realize that when it turned into a human form, like, how mitigated its powers would be. So it might be a situation like it's kind of stuck in its form until it gets its full power back. So once again, like, what's been happening? Has it been slowly back ever since Barry got his speed back and she's been like, well, it's been recharging the entire time, but then like Fuerza and Psyche are coming out like now because now I'm also wondering, like, could they be like other Speed Force siblings? Because like the lightning in the air, like they could be other, that there might be other like speed forces out there. Like maybe they're beings, manifestations of these other, of kind of like a speed force storm, which I'm kind of alluding that to. Maybe they were born from it, so they're kind of like siblings. Or like I said, maybe they're just manifestations of other things. Like Psyche is like the manifestation of like nightmares brought to physical form. That they're like ancient, powerful beings that are just kind of concepts that are actually things. Like maybe like the Speed Force represents speed and maybe like hope and love type of situation, and maybe Psyche represents nightmare and fear, and maybe like Fuerza represents strength and some yada yada. Like I'm curious, is it something of kind of that vein? That's all I can think of when she says like they're like me. Like at very least they're like these godlike beings, which is interesting because another thing I was thinking about is how did Barry and them avert crisis? Like when everything was going, like Barry was able to find his way into the Speed Force. That regardless of everything, like even at the end of everything, the Speed Force was kind of still there. So that kind of explains why like these beings are still around, because even an antimatter isn't enough. I mean, it even makes you wonder, is Psyche actually dead, or is he just kind of knocked out of commission for a while? Because it's like, oh, like you've kind of like pulled, like shattered its physical form in this world, but it's like the Speed Force. It's a different being manifesting itself in this world. So maybe Psyche will come back. Are these the only ones? Are there actually others out there? Because we saw multiple colors of like the Speed Force, like lightning and stuff like that. So maybe we're dealing with like a handful of other, like I said, maybe they're siblings. Maybe they're supposed to be like kind of like how like there's like a balance with like the elements, like, taking like an Avatar situation. And even outside of Avatar, like, like you have your earth, wind, fire, water type of situation, like, well, that's specifically Avatar, but I was also thinking like, something like Trolls, where you have like, space, time, and Mirage. I couldn't remember the final. If you never played the Trolls games, that don't make any sense. But I'm wondering, like, are we dealing with kind of like 7 elements in that regard? Another one would be like Shadow Hearts. Like there's like elements like, well, once again, fire, water, wind, earth. But then you also have like light, darkness, and non-elemental. Like I'm wondering, is there supposed to be like a 7 balances where it's like maybe the Speed Force, there are 6 others that kind of represent the balance. And now that balance has kind of been thrown out, and they're kind of running wild, trying to destroy everything. Maybe, because at first I thought when they were introducing Kramer, I was wondering if that's what, I was wondering if that's actually like Fuerza in disguise or something. That's why I was wondering, like, was there some setup in that? But it doesn't seem like it. Could still be, but I don't know. Like, once again, this is just my thoughts about it. Obviously, we'll get answers for it hopefully soon enough, but sets up some really interesting stuff to figure out, like, what's going on here. And what, hopefully the Speed Force has some answers about all of this and what's kind of been happening on that side of things. Ultimately, once again, too, we know this ties into Godspeed in some shape or form. So, maybe this is kind of his making as well. Who knows how that's still a mystery that hasn't even begun to be tackled yet. So that might be something later in the season that really comes up more. I mean, this could be very similar to Savitar. Savitar didn't come up into season 3 until like quite a bit later, because it was like alchemy. That was kind of the main villain until Savitar came upon the stage. So maybe it's kind of something in a similar vein as that. So I'm really interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about today. Next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.